We continue today with the 5th chapter of the book of Yechezkel. Yesterday's chapter was all this description about the horrors that were going to happen in Yerushalayim. And that's where the 5th chapter continues in the midst of that prophecy. Vata ben Adam. And now you mortal man. Of course, we've seen this so many times. We say it every single time almost. This book is about God's Merkava, about the unknown aspects of God, as opposed to that. Yechezkel is just Ben Adam, just a regular man, like every other man for that matter. Kach lecha cherev chada ta'ar hagalabim tikachena lach lavarta al roshcha v'al zikanecha v'lakachta lecha mozne mishkal v'chilaktam. So now, man, take a sharp knife, use it as a barber's razor, and pass it over your head and beard. Then take scales and divide the hairs. Right, this is going to be a sign of the mourning, the taking of the taking the sword and cutting off the hair like a barber does. We'll see cherev is the key word that's in this chapter. It's going to be used over and over again. The cherev, the sword, and this is Rashi says it's like the sword of Nebuchadnezzar, whose sword is coming to come into to destroy the Jewish people in Yerushalayim. Shlishit ba'or tavir b'toch ha'ir. When the days of siege are complete, kimlot yimei matzor, then what's going to happen is ba'or. A third of them will be destroyed in fire. V'lakachta et hashlishit takeh b'cherev svivoteha. So the first third are going to be destroyed by the fire. Okay, and then a third are going to be struck with the cherev, with the sword, all around the city and svivotel, all around it. And the third, what's going to happen, God says, is I am going to unsheathe my sword. And the wind is going to scatter them, and the unsheathed sword, the sharpest sword in the sense, is going to go after them. And take also a few hairs from here and there and tie them up in your clothing. Take some more of them and cast them into the fire and burn them in the fire. From this a fire shall go upon all of Israel. So continue with this just destruction that's going to happen, which was described first in the last chapter. We'll come back to understand a little bit more of it after we go through most of the verses. Ko amar Adonai Elohim, Zot Yerushalayim betoch hagoyim samtiha usvivoteha aratzot. So God said, this is Yerushalayim, in the midst of all of the countries and all of the nations that are around her. But what did Jerusalem do? It rebelled against me. We had a couple of chapters ago, we talked about the Mar versus the Matok, what Yechezkel sees as Matok, the prophecies of God are going to come out Mar, going to be bitter for everybody. Right? So Bnei Yisrael, they're bitter, they rebel against God, and they are more wicked than all the nations that are around it. Because they hated my commandments, my judgments, my rules. They didn't follow and go after my rules. And that's why Yerushalayim, here we're told the Jewish people are going to be struck down so terribly because they are worse than the other nations around them. How are they worse than the other nations around them? It's hard to say. If they were, of course, the other nations were also worshiping idols. Bnei Yisrael worshiping more idols over and over again. We're told about how they're taking the idols of Ammon or Moab or whatever it might be, this Baal and that Baal. But presumably, right, Bnei Yisrael had more prophets who were trying to get them to do things the right way. Bnei Yisrael had the commands from God, but they didn't listen. In that way, seemingly they're worse than the other nations. We're in verse 7, Pasuk Zayin, Ko amar Adonai Elohim, Yan hamanchem min hagoyim asher shviyotochem bechukotai lo alachtem vet mishpatai lo asitem uchemishpatai hagoyim asher shviyotichem lo asitem. God said, because you have outdone the nations that are around you, right? You're more than them, not more in numbers, but you're more in terms of your sins, and you have not listened to my laws or my statutes, and you didn't follow my rules. right? That's what you haven't even observed the rules of the nations that are around you. And you know this if you look at this verse. There is an allusion very, very clearly to a section of the Torah. Right? If you look in there about the 10th or 12th word, B'chukotai lo alachtem, that mishpatai lo asitem, im b'chukotai telechu, yet mishpatai tishmeru, v'asitem otam. That's the way that Parshat B'chukotai, which starts with a blessing, begins, telling Bnei Israel that they will, if they listen to God, then these blessings will happen to them. And after 10 or 12 verses, I forget the exact number, we have the imlo tishmeru, if you don't listen. So, right, the beginning of that is im b'chukotai telechu. Here we have b'chukotai lo halachtem, yet mishpatai tishmeru, and here we have mishpatai lo asitem. And then right, and asitem otam, we have the asitem. So clearly this is working off of that. In the end of the brachot, in fact, there in Vayikra, it talks about the cherev lo ta'avor ba'artechem. Things will be so great, you'll be like, I've said it before, you'll be like Costa Rica, where there's no army. There's going to be no sword that's going to come into your land. You won't need to defend yourselves. You won't need to have an army. You won't have enemies all around you like Israel. No problems for you. That's what you will be. And in the second half, and we'll come back to more of that, but the Cherev, and that's the prominence of the Cherev. This chapter is the end of Vayikra, the blessings that followed by the curses that will happen to Bnei Israel if they don't follow the commandments that God has given them. And Yechezkel here is saying that they have not done so. Let's continue, and then we'll come back and we'll look a little bit into that Vayikra. We're in verse 8. God says, I'm telling you that I'm going to deal with you and I will execute judgments, right? You didn't do mishpatim. I'm going to do mishpatim that all of the nations are going to see. Vasiti v'ch et asher lo asiti v'et asher lo aseh kamohu od ya'an kol toratayich. And an account of your to'evot, your abominations, I will do what has never been done, and the like of which I never do again. We think back to the Torah, different places where it talks about God taking Jewish people out of Israel that had never been done for other nations. So the same way that Bnei Israel got rewards and miracles that nobody else had seen, so too, unfortunately, will they see tragedies that nobody else has seen. Parents will eat their children, and children will eat their parents. In Eicha, we have a description of right, the mothers boiling their children, eating their kids. We don't really see where it talks about the children eating their parents, if you understand this literally. And God says that there are going to be judgments against you, and I will scatter you in all directions, which of course happened at the time of what's already happened with the Galut, the exile of the 10 tribes, and continues with the upcoming destruction of the Beit HaMikdash just a handful of years after this prophecy is given to Yechezkel. In verse 11, Pasuk Yud, Chai ani ne'um Adonai Elohim, im lo ya'an et mikdashi timet v'chol shikutzayich uv'chol to'avatayich v'gam ani egra v'lo tachos eini v'gam ani lo echmol. So God said, because you defiled my sanctuary with all of your horrible things, all of your abominations, I'm going to turn away from you, and I will show no pity. I will turn and will show no compassion. Just one thing to think about. Well, it was true of our previous prophet in the previous book as well. Yechezkel is a Kohen. Yechezkel ben Buzi is a Kohen, just like Yirmiyahu was described as a Kohen, and thus the idea of the destruction of the temple, the idea of of Bnei Israel bringing abominations and soiling the temple has special meaning to him. Shil shiteich badever yomutu. So again, we come back to a third of your people will die from dever, will die from pestilence. Uvarav yichlu betochech, or in a famine. Vashlishit bacherev yiplu, and a third will fall by the sword. Svivotayich, all around you. Vashlishit lechol ruach ezareh v'cherev arik acharehem, and a third I will scatter in every direction. I will unsheathe the sword after them, and that's the way they are going to be killed. V'chala api v'hanichoti chamati bam v'hen chamti. I will vent all of my anger, and this, right, the destruction, the killing that's going to go on here is going to satisfy my fury and my anger upon them. V'yadu ki ani Adonai dibarti b'kinati b'chaloti chamati bum, and you will know that I am God from my zealousness, from my passion, from my anger, and the destruction that's going to happen to you. That lecharba, and I'll make you into a ruin. So the word cherba, like churban, it means a ruin, a destruction. The destruction, churban, Beit Hamikdash, obviously related to the word cherev, the sword. I'll make you a mockery. Everybody who passes by is going to look and see Jerusalem as a busha, as an embarrassment. And when this happens, you're going to be, let me just read the rest of the verse. Actually, when I do these things to you through my anger and through my rage and my fury, then you're going to become an example, a mockery of an example of a mockery. You're going to be the example of the of a country that was completely a civilization society that was completely destroyed. When I let loose my deadly arrows and the famine and the destruction, when this happens, it's just going to get worse and worse, and I'm going to break the staff of bread. You're going to be completely bereft of everything. And I will send famine upon you, and wild beasts, the shikruch, the dever, the dam yavorbach, and pestilence and bloodshed will be everywhere. But I will bring the sword to you. I am God who has spoken. So here another, say it straight out, horrific chapter. Yechezkel is saying as to what is going to happen to the Jewish people. And as I mentioned, this is really working off of the beginning of Parshat Bechukotai, which is the 26th chapter of Vayikra. We talked about the first verse there, and the promises there are no fear and peace, and you're going to chase your enemy in verse 7 in chapter 26, and they will fall by the sword to you. Right, and verse 8. It also says, your enemies are going to fall by the sword. You are to be the ones who are wielding the sword, and they are going to die. And this is the opposite of these things. God says there, I'm going to be amongst you. You will live long. And then comes the curses, which are much longer, which again, it begins, if you don't listen to what I'm saying, to all of these mitzvot, and God promises, terrible destruction. And in that destruction, some of the words like we see here are in those words. I'm just trying to find them for 1 second. So this is verse 25 in chapter 26. I will bring the sword against you. Later on is I'm going to send the pestilence amongst you. Right, so it's this chapter is really the, not the undoing, but it is the demonstration, unfortunately, of the of Bnei Israel going against what God promises, and thus those curses are going to have to. Let me read one more verse. This is from 33, and this really has the same wording. This is Leviticus 26:33. Vayikra Chaf Vav Lamed Gimel. I will scatter you amongst the nations. We have that exact expression. And I will unsheathe the sword after you. Same exact expression. Your lands will be desolate, and they will be filled with the sword. And so over and over again, we have the unfortunate reality that Yechezkel is telling us that in the very, very near future, the curses of Vayikra, the end of Vayikra, are unfortunately going to come true.